This is Dr. Charles Parker, and you're listening to Core Brain Journal. It's a place where I connect both fresh discoveries and interesting different perspectives from advanced mind science with the realities of real people and everyday life down on Main Street. Well, welcome again, folks, to Dr. Charles Parker one more time at Core Brain Journal, and we're very pleased to have an individual with a very interesting story today, Mr. Dean Roberts, who is, in a way, a kind of public guest. He's not coming at us from, a PhD in nutritional medicine, but he's coming to us from real street experience. Welcome, Dean. We're really pleased to have you on board here.
Great to be talking with you.
So, I'll tell you a little bit about him, and then we're going to ask him some questions, and we're going to have a conversation. It'll be two guys talking about ways to consider changing your life in a constructive way. That's what we do at Core Brain Journal, and that's what it's going to be. This is episode, I forgot to tell you, 070. And so I'll introduce you first of all. Dean is an individual who has just finished a book about his journey from being expelled from school at age 16. And he then went on, after that expulsion, to create a multi-million-dollar manufacturing business 25 years later. And he was telling me before we started, he has since retired from that. And Dean now he has a health food store, and he's taking care of himself. And he's, at his age, I'm not going to tell you his age, I'll let him tell you his age, but he is a guy with 25-year-old vitality. So, Dean, tell us a little more about yourself personally and how you got to be the way you are and how you arrived at this place in life.
Coincidence and dumb luck is a lot of it. Mm-hmm. I hit a real low point at about age 25. I was about almost 80 pounds heavier than I am now. I had very serious case of asthma. I used the isomedihaler about every week to 10 days, along with a pack of Winstons every day. I drank a couple 6-packs of beer, and I ate the most disgusting, I call them non-lethal ingestibles now, but back then I used to call it food.
Yeah.
And finally, I woke up in the middle of the night. I was sleeping in a chair because I had this cold that I couldn't even lay down and breathe. And somehow the hand of the divine came down, or the timing was right, or however it happened. I realized that this road is going to put me in an early grave. And I stopped smoking, and I started drinking, and I stopped eating a bag of Oreos every night, and started to study what it would take to feel better and look better and be able to get rid of all of the depression and anger that I walked around with all the time. I didn't realize all that at that point, but I knew I had to change a lot. And right around that same time, I was lucky enough to get a copy of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations.
There you go. You're a Stoic. Oh my gosh, long distance high five, buddy.
I've got that same copy, and the pages are all falling out, and I read a little bit out of that every single morning, and it boils down to not what you know, it's what you can use when you need to know it. To take that right to the firing line when you know you shouldn't drink Coke, but you're real thirsty and there's nothing else around. Well, just this time, but to remind myself of that knowledge that I've acquired over the years every day is an enormous help to living as fully and wholesomely as I can.
That's fantastic. I'm just going to mention real quickly, interrupt you if you don't, pardon me for interrupting, but
no, please.
The whole Marcus Aurelius thing is a really big deal. I mean, the Seneca and Epictetus, I can't pronounce
Epictetus.
Epictetus, there you go. But those guys are transformational people. Now, how did you happen to get on to Marcus Aurelius back then?
I signed up for this classic book club, and that was the first copy that arrived. And the timing was perfect, Charles. I lived in Jersey, and I had to drive to Brooklyn every day. And it came just around the same time that the Arab oil crisis came, and I couldn't drive anymore. I just couldn't stand in the lines. Mm-hmm. So I started to take the bus. And And then it was Epicurus and Epictetus and Seneca. And I really dove into Stoic philosophy because they kept coming in that order. There was a Plato stuck in there, but there was all these different Stoic philosophers. And it was transformative. Along with the other book that really impacted my life at that time was Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
I'll be doggone. Isn't that interesting? Because I just got the, I don't know if you're familiar with Ryan Holiday. Are you familiar with him?
The Obstacle is the Way.
Yeah. I mean,
oh, that's a great book.
That is
really
a super
like
book. I'm going to have that. I'll put it in the show notes for people. But The
Definitely.
Obstacle is the Way is such an interesting book. I mean, he's such a young guy. And
I know. It's incredible.
He's like 25 or something. He's like,
I know.
And he's kicking out this really heavy, excellent, practical, utilitarian philosophy. I mean, it's just really great.
Yeah, well, it kind of goes along with the theory of reincarnation, like Mozart. Who knows?
Yeah, I'm going to mention one book because we're going to get off this subject in a few minutes, probably, because just the conversation goes on. But because I now know you a little bit better than I did a few minutes ago, I'm going to definitely recommend one of my favorite books, which is Science and Sanity by Alfred Korzybski, which is, if you go to Core Brain Journal, it's down in the footer in the lower left-hand corner. You can see I got my favorite books lined up there, and one of them is The Obstacle is the Way. But you're going to love it. It's a little deep, I'll be honest with you. You may not want to read the original one. You may want to read, but I got into it because it changed the way a person thinks about time and context in a very scientific way, and how we're lost in the science of appearances, and how appearances and labels are absolutely stopping our development as human beings.
What was the second word? Science
and Sanity. I always have trouble with the subtitle, but it's the non-Aristotelian field theory of general semantics. It's heavy, but basically, I'll tell you real quickly what it is to make it unheavy. Aristotle was a label guy, and what he's saying is that labels are killing us, and that if we really use things like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and really look at change in time, then nothing, if you say, well, that's just a chair, you're already living in a Paleolithic world by saying it's only this or only that, or it's just this or that. Because the chair itself is in a state of change, although we may not be able to perceive it very well. So he's really very strong against reductionistic thinking. And one of the big problems in modern psychiatry is exactly that, reductionistic thinking. And human beings are labeled and counterproductively labeled. And then meds are thrown at counterproductive labels that only cover a portion of who they are as a person. So that's what. And since you're on that path, I thought you might like that book.
It sounds great because I've kind of come to one of my other favorite authors is Robert DeRope. He wrote a book called The Master Game. And one of his hallmark sayings was, by skillful means, we can learn to be comfortable even in hell. And he talks about seeing everything as a process. There's there's a chair, but in 50 years there'll be a pile of sawdust, or if the termites get here, it'll be different. Everything is in process, everything is in change, and even the rocks. So to make this label everything and make it real is a dangerous concept. I realized that a while ago.
Well, he's read Korzybski, no doubt, because that is exactly Korzybski's pitch, and Korzybski also brings in the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. He says on basic physics, from a point of basic physics, it's time and change, and down on the electron level. So,
yep.
So yeah, that's what we do. And I mean, what we do when you talk about functional medicine is it applies to psychiatry and human development. Basically, functional is function. It addresses process, which is the counterpoint to labels, which are fixed. So, depression is a label, it's fixed. And a human being is more than depression. I hated it. Well, I used to work in addiction medicine. I couldn't work with them anymore because they were so reductionistic and so deadening. And I hated to see human beings treated the way they were. You know, you're only an alcoholic until you get that straight. I mean, I just couldn't stand it. I just got out of the business because, you know, it doesn't work that way. Human beings don't respond affirmatively to being put into negative boxes like that.
You came out of traditional medicine. Did you ever come to a point where there was like this, just the bell started ringing, that you realized how completely flawed and unwholesome the whole construct was?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, it's taken me a long time because I thought I could work with it and work within it. And I do work within it in a certain respectful way because I think there are a lot of really excellent things that have been done in traditional medicine. But something you need to know about me, Dean, is I'm a DO. My mother was a DO. My brother was a DO. I'm an osteopathic physician. So I was a little on the edge even growing into it. But then I read Korsibsky during my internship in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And it was so funny. I'll just tell you a quick story. The guy was Dr. Don Barbacum. He had a red Lincoln Continental convertible, green golf pants and a plaid jacket and a pompadour hairdo that looked like Elvis Presley. And we're down there in the emergency room, and he says, "Hey, Parker, I heard you wrote poetry when you were a kid in college. I want to talk to you. Let's take a moment here at 2 a.m. and go down and talk a little bit." And I'm like, I don't want to talk to anybody at 2 a.m., especially this guy who looks so plastic. And he introduced me to Alfred Korsibsky, who used to live in his apartment in Chicago. And it was a life-changing experience for me because once I read Korsibsky, it was like, oh my gosh. And actually, that's part of the reason I got interested in psychiatry, because it really talked about mind science in a way. A lot of the people that Korsibsky talked about in Science and Sanity were Freud, Wittgenstein, people who were thinking about the process of thinking. So,
is that with a K or a C?
K. It's Korzybski. Nice Polish name. Zybski.
Got it.
Yeah, he's a great guy. And I've got some videos on him on my website. You know, where he's commenting about change, and it's, you know, a guy like you will just love this because it will take you into all kinds of interesting places. His dedication in Science and Sanity is dedicated to probably 20 or 30 different really interesting historical figures, both in language development and in mind science and in physics. So it's really pretty interesting.
Yeah, if you can't learn a bunch of new stuff every week, you're going in the wrong direction.
That's so true. That's one of the reasons to be talking to a guy like you, because I think, you know, every one of us has a little piece of additional information that it can be constructively communicated to others, our listeners, whoever they happen to be. And they could be a serious, high-level professional person or a street person who's just like, I've got to figure some way to redo my life. And, you know, it's all a big conversation. Yeah.
One of the things that helped me a lot was journaling. I started to journal just about every day in the mid-'70s. And I can refer back to that person struggling around trying to figure out what to do. And I lost my train here.
Well, it's really...
I'll go through the value of journaling, I think, is a personal tool of growth. Oh, I know what the point was. That I can look at these different periods of my life, 1980 to 1990 and 2000. And I think that in the last 5 or 6 years, I've learned more per year, and I feel better about life than I ever have before. I don't think that age has got to do anything except give you a broader base of wisdom and knowledge if you take care of yourself.
Yeah, I think age, speaking as a guy, you know, we're very similar in ages. You know, speaking as a person who, I'm totally with you on this, I think the older you get, the more open you are to listening, because you've had some pain in your life and you've tried to do it the way you thought you should do it, and it didn't work. And then you come around to what does work. You start asking the questions and you start becoming self-reflective. So
and
true.
You get a real picture of how little you know in comparison to what there is to know.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
It's like climbing a mountain. The higher you get, the further the horizon gets away. I I'm amazed almost every day from new information that I come to understand or put into a place that makes it even just a few minutes before we started talking. I listened to one of your other interviews with Dr. Toogood, and it just reinforced I actually learned some new things from it. It's just an adventure that seems to get better and better.
Well, thank you so much for even mentioning it, because that's what happens to me every time I get on the horn with somebody here. We start talking and we go down a different path, and just there's so many interesting people that have really contributory experiences and additional knowledge that really is worthy of sharing. No question about it. So tell us a little bit about your book. You were journaling. Let's talk about your book, I'll Fix My Head Before I'm Dead. Tell us a little bit about that, if you will, please.
Well, that kind of came out of a theme that I had in my journaling. It's a lot of it are just excerpts from journals at different parts of my life. First 15 or 18 pages are just biographical. It gives you a brief overview of where I started and how my career evolved. And the rest of it is just kind of chronicles the adventure of self-discovery. And the adventure gets bigger and bigger. It's an incredible thing coming to the planet Earth
so
for whatever reason.
Tell us a little bit about, pardon me for interrupting, because I totally agree with you. The thing I was thinking about as you were talking was, I'm always trying to strike a chord of what's the utilitarian message to a person who's listening. Where can we go with this? I think I got a little far afield and I maybe led us astray by talking too much about field theory of general semantics. But the issue is, where do you go with what you do? Like, you now have a health food store, and you're very opinionated. You were talking to me about some very interesting stuff that I think our listeners need to hear from you personally, about how you changed your life back there when you hit the wall and you started doing some things differently.
I kind of sum it up on the back cover of my book. I just read you this. It'll just take a second. I'm an expert. I know much more about die cutting plywood than hardly anybody in the world. The rest of what's in this book are questionable homegrown theories. However, these two concepts that I feel quite certain about: study, exercise, meditate, and write every day. Each instant offers an opportunity to improve things by either thought or deed. By doing this, I have continually improved what started out to be a really uncomfortable situation. I think that's the message I'd like to take to the world. Put a program together. Own the morning. Don't be watching email or watching the news or anything else. Take that time when you're fresh and you're on top of your experience. Write, study, meditate, and exercise. And of course, ingest food instead of what they sell in the food stores.
Let's talk a little bit about your exercise, your food, the way you approach your life in that regard, because I think it might be instructive. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
I have a series of exercises that I picked up quite a while ago. It's called the 5 rights. I think if anybody Googles that, they'll find it. It's just some simple calisthenics. I do that every day. I do a long, drawn-out yoga practice once a week. Every other day, I either lift weights or go on a rowing machine. And I try to walk and move. You see, exercise is totally overblown as far as I'm concerned. The real exercise, we're designed to move. I don't sit. I'm raising my legs and putting my arms in the air, and I've got a stand-up desk. But even standing desk, is a lot of talk about that. It's as bad as sitting if you just stand there. You got to move. We're built to move. So that's my major exercise is movement. All the time, stretching, standing on one leg, balance on one leg, then stand on the other leg. So anyway, that's the exercise part of it. That comes after a couple of cups of coffee and some reading. I get up around 4 o'clock usually, and I read and journal for about an hour and a half, and then my wife gets up. And then we read out of 5 different books that we've been following through. Dan Amen's Brain, I forget it. He's a doctor that's done 100,000 brain scans, and he's got a bunch of different books, and it changes as we finish one and start the other.
Yeah, I worked with
And
him.
then
You don't know this.
Daniel Amen.
I worked with him for 4 years. I opened the D.C. office.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, we've done a few brain scans, and he's a very interesting guy. In fact, he presented in D.C. this weekend. I was up at a conference this weekend. So.
Oh, really? I learned a lot from that book.
Yeah.
And we're about halfway through it. So then after the exercise, I meditate. And I've recently started to blog every day. Then after that, the day's up for grabs. I get down to the factory and visit with my kids and see what's going on there. And I get down to the Green Earth and catch up with some people and have lunch and hang out. And that's about it.
Well, you talked about what's your diet thing. You sound like you're quite opinionated about food and so on. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that, because you're doing something right.
Well, I'd say for breakfast, I like to have an avocado, a couple eggs, and some leftover vegetables from the night before, and a bunch of vitamins that I wonder if I'm doing myself any good or harm with. And I don't usually eat too much lunch. I usually eat breakfast kind of late, and then dinner would be. I made dinner before this podcast. I went out and picked some kale and broccoli in the garden, some onions and some scallions, and I slow cooked them for about a half an hour in coconut oil, and then I chopped up a bunch of organic chicken and tossed it in, and I'll dress that down with some mustard and vinegar and coconut, like soy sauce, and a bunch of olive oil.
You're an organic gardener then.
Well, with this time of the year, yeah, and that comes down almost every day like that. I'll make enough so I can eat tomorrow breakfast and dinner, and then the next day, instead of using chicken, I'll throw in some salmon or some locally grown organic beef, and I keep it simple, and we don't go out to eat a lot.
Dean, now you have to tell me this. Now I was doing organic gardening back in 1968. And we had a terrific garden, but I tell you, I could not grow broccoli for squat. I was great with Swiss chard, which is totally easy to cook.
Oh, to
grow. But how do you actually? Do you have any tricks on the broccoli thing?
The only thing that my wife's mostly the gardener. She plants and takes care of, and I do the harvesting and prepare. I like, if we freeze stuff, I do the preserving. The only trick I think she does is she takes a piece of plastic drainage pipe, 4 inches, about 4 or 6 inches in diameter, and puts the plant in the middle of that. She says it keeps the cutworms or some attacking agent from. But we had a bunch of broccoli. It was really nice. We're just on the tail end of it now.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, my daughter's into it up in Camden, Maine, so I'll have to tell her about it, because she and her husband, I don't have time for it anymore, but I get up at 4 like you do. I'm totally with you 100% on what you're talking about. I usually get about an hour and a half, maybe 2 in on writing. That's when it works, and then go on down the road. But you also ride a bike.
Yeah, I do. Not as much this summer, but for some reason I was busy. I don't know exactly. Oh, I know what happened. We have another building, and my wife and I built a Airbnb apartment, so that took up more time.
Oh, that'll keep you busy, right?
But it's fun. We've met a lot of really interesting people since we opened it, and so that's what happened to the bike season this year.
Well, I think the final thing is we're getting as we're going along here. I don't know why I said final. I was just I slipped on that one, but because I don't mean to put any closure on this. I was thinking about what you would say looking back on it. You journaled. You made a what was the painful realization? How did you actually make the transformation? My feeling is people don't change unless they really get into some pain. And unless they have some kind of, wake-up call that drives them to do something different. Could you share your thoughts on that, please?
Well, that evening that I described to you was a milestone turning point. But I think it's something that happens all the time. My weight has fluctuated between 200 and a high point of about 210, but that was only once. But many times I've gone from 185 to 140. Right now I'm about 145, and it's just about ideal for me. I fought that battle my whole life, and it wasn't until I learned how to, and this is only within the last 6 or 8 months, to eat a lot more oil. I mean, I never bought into that low-fat thing, but I have consciously increased the amount of olive oil and coconut oil that I consume in a day. And you know what? I'm not hungry all day anymore. I feel satisfied when I get up from the table. I'm satiated till the next morning. It's just like amazing magic transformation. And so there's an example of continual learning. How it's something that's troubled me my whole life. It's just become easy now.
So what's your favorite topic when you're blogging? Now we're talking about taking care of yourself and fixing your head. What's your favorite topic when you're up there blogging and you're thinking about what you're going to tell your readers? What's your theme there?
I guess just amazement at this experience of life, and absolutely unexplainable, mysterious. The mystery just gets bigger and bigger, you know. And if I somehow try to look at that from different angles and try to not understand it, and to enjoy it, but it's bigger than joy. To just be a wholesome part of this short term. I'm going to be 78 next month. I mean, what's the best case scenario? I live to 120. So,
yeah, right.
I'm down to 30, 40 years.
Yeah. You're living legacy.
Yeah. Well, when I'm 100, I'm going to demand the stage anywhere I go. I'll be like,
time to get up and speak. Yes.
Yeah. You better listen to me. I know what I'm talking about now. I can prove it.
Yeah. It's so funny. Yeah. I think one of the things, we're in the same boat. It's the reason I'm doing Corporate Journal is because I do have an occasional opinion, but I really like to hear the opinions of others and encourage that dialogue. I think that's kind of what you're saying you do is you get into it. Now, do you miss being a manager? Let's talk about that, because you mentioned quickly die cutting plywood, which I have no idea. What is die cutting plywood? What does that mean?
Where a steel rule die is like a cookie cutter. When I grew up, and my father was a die maker, and I learned how to make steel rule dies when I was mid-teens. And after my parents retired, and the business evolved from just custom cutting for other companies to manufacturing dollhouse kits, we did some very, very intricate die-cut dollhouses, not for kids, but for as a collector item, really, for middle-aged women that love to have furniture and rugs and curtains and all of the 1-inch scale accessories that are available for 1-inch scale dollhouses.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
So, yeah, I got really good at that. We've come up with some techniques that enabled us to do. If you look at greenleafdollhouses.com, you can see how intricate you can get with die-cut plywood.
Sounds very interesting. Now, in that business, you had to be a manager. Do you miss being a manager and working with people in that capacity?
That's a good question. Charles, I was never a manager. I was fortunate enough to get people that could manage details. I was a leader. I felt that I could get, because I looked at my job as I had one purpose in that company, and that was to get everything done that had to be done, not to do anything myself. I consciously, not to the point of picking up garbage. I would always pick up garbage and put it in the garbage can, but just about anything else, I would try to figure out, not just to get somebody to do it, but to set up a system so that nobody had to do it in the future. And I think that's my gift, and the thing that I do miss is being a leader, having a group of interested, involved people around that were looking to do their share, to make this thing that we were doing work as good as we can, and to actualize the possibilities of what we were doing. I miss that, and I look forward to the future, to creating some sort of an organization where I can fill that role again.
You need a podcast, buddy. you would love it.
Well, I think I would, but I came off 4 new ones in the last 3 days when I followed this lead with Seth Godin.
Yeah.
And there's nobody needs, I don't think there's anything I can add to all of the quality and the quantity of what's going on out there.
Well, I think it depends on really, he's in the broader spectrum. Seth talks about management. I think, and I'm not telling you what to do because I don't really know you, but I think you have some things to contribute, and I think they might evolve just like journaling when you begin the conversation. And you have some things to teach others, just as we've been doing here. So
I've gone back and forth on that. I thought a way to start might be to do a local radio show for an hour, sponsored by our health food store, and talk about holistic living, and to interview some local, because there are a few doctors in the area that got some glimmer of what's going on, and to interview local personalities and talk about health. So that might be a way to start that. Yeah, I would love it. I mean, you got such a great job. When I was listening to you talk to Dr. Toogood, I was thinking, wow, what incredibly powerful information these people are bringing out to what seems to be a completely deaf population.
Yeah, it's a strange world. It's a very strange world. And apropos of that, tell me this, and you could practice right here with me. What would be in your store, in terms of things that you see benefit from, or things that you've learned about the health food that you have in your store? What's a focus for you? What's a theme that you think people need to know about?
Whole foods, fresh foods. The produce counter and the bulk section are probably the only things. If I was going to have a store that would sell only things I would eat, it would be very small. Our produce, we have a great Amish local local farmer that brings in the nicest, freshest, organically grown produce, and fruit, and nuts, and seeds, and good locally grown. About a mile and a half. I live in the middle of 45 acres here in rural New York, and about 5 miles from here is where all the beef that I eat grows. They're not just organic. These people are biodynamic, and they treat those animals with love and care, and I get their eggs from there. We have chickens now, but some critter got in and killed a whole bunch of them. So the bunch that we have now are just going to start laying eggs. But the wholesome, free-range, organically fed eggs are, man, that's the top of my list. I think that's really good food.
Well, you said another word that's very interesting. I can't believe how similar we are in many respects. You used the word biodynamic. Now, I'm going to tell you what I know about that word, but I'd love for you to tell me what you know about that word, because it's a pretty doggone interesting concept.
Well, I think it has something to do with Rudolf Steiner.
I don't know him. Tell me about him. What's going on with Rudolf Steiner?
He founded the Waldorf schools. You've heard of the Waldorf schools, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was a philosopher, a teacher, and a very important figure in history, because the Waldorf schools, I think, are really the only way. If you're going to send a kid to school, which I don't think schools are a place for kids anyway, but if you do, I think the Waldorf schools are the most wholesome choice you could make.
Completely agree with you.
The biodynamic is, I don't know much about it. I know it's a standard above organic, and I know these people well, and I've been to their farm many times, and I trust their integrity. So I feel very comfortable.
I'll tell you, I don't know much about it either, so I don't wish to be a poser in this conversation by any means. But I was into organic gardening, and I read this book on the French biodynamic gardening method. And one of the things they told me, and I did, and it was really successful, was that if you run steel stakes, like fence stakes, and wire the twisted wire on the stakes, that you would actually focus the forces of the universe in a sort of an electrostatic way that would make the vegetables grow better. It's called the French biodynamic gardening method, and I didn't know if it applied to cattle because that's what you were talking about, and I was curious to see if it applied. And those tomatoes grew like crazy. I mean, we were canning tomatoes.
Oh, you did it?
Yeah, oh yeah, we did the whole thing. And then the other thing, which is the trick, you'll get a kick out of this, it's so humorous to think about it now, was you actually tied the tomatoes up with women's nylon stockings because they would help focus the energy, the static electricity on the wires going across between the steel posts. And
I'm going to be reading more on biodynamics.
It sounds really good. It was so funny. I mean, it was a lot of fun. Your wife will get a kick out of it, you know?
Well, I'll tell you this, these Amish farmers that we have, they had a greenhouse that was 45 feet wide and 100 feet long, and they had tomato plants 8 feet high. They were suspending them from cables on the top, and they said they get 1,000 pounds of tomatoes out of there a week, and they were bringing them into our store in mid-May.
Oh my gosh!
I mean, they had, and I was talking to him about the soil amendments that they use, and that's a big key to this. He started talking about, and this is like a 19-year-old kid. He's telling me about he says those plants over there, they had a few brown leaves. They're a little bit short in manganese, and I saw the future. Charles, I saw it, and I stood there with goose pimples. Oh. That place was just so beautiful. They had three or four different varieties of tomatoes, and those plants probably weighed 150 pounds apiece. They had so much fruit on them.
That sounds so interesting. I mean,
these folks just moved to the area a year and a half ago. His brother's got a 40-cow organic dairy right down the road, and they bring in squash and turnip and onions and potatoes to our store. It's when I get all this organic crap from California and Peru and everything else, okay, that's the standard that we got to work with, and you can't get bananas in Otsego County. But I know when I see old Daniel bringing in baskets of food that there's real food in the store. Fantastic.
I mean, it's interesting that the young guy knows so much about the details of the nutrition for the plants. It's really speaks well to what they're doing. Fantastic.
Oh, I'm looking forward to associating with those people. I definitely want to get to know them better and spend some time out there. The whole place. They just bought this house. They had planted flowers and bushes all around the house already. They had a farm stand across the street, and with 2 buggies parked into it. So I think we're getting a whole settlement that's kind of moving into the area, which is, as far as I'm concerned, it's incredible.
Well, Dean, thank you so much for joining us. You've been just a great guest, and really what you've done is punctuated a theme that we hear all the time with the people that we're talking to. I mean, anybody that's thinking up on the edge is thinking very, very similarly to the way you are. And of course, everybody complements each other. And so what happens is Dean's book, folks, is going to be available at corebrainjournal.com/070 drawing, and that's I'll Fix My Head Before I'm Dead. And Dean, in closing, tell us where you'd like to send people to listen to and read a little more about what you're doing, please.
I have a blog that's boneyardexpress.blogspot.com, and they can reach me at illfixmyhead@gmail.com.
That's interesting. That's your email address.
Yeah.
Very good. Now, do you want me to publish that, or do you want me to keep that private?
Oh, yeah, please do that. Okay. I would be happy to hear from anybody that's interested
that's great.
Further discussion or possibly any sort of mentoring, because as my interest is in wellness and mental wellness, physical wellness. They're hand in hand. There's no separation there. But I am pretty qualified in discussing business plans and helping people maybe figure out what the next step would be if they do aspire to be in their own business.
That sounds fantastic. I'm sure some people are going to take you up on it. I really, really appreciate the time with you. It was so much fun talking to you. I feel like I'm sitting right up next to you up there in New York, while we're talking. It's amazing.
Charles, it was great. I really enjoyed our time, too. And let's stay in touch.
Please do. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Core Brain Journal. We're working every day behind the scenes to bring you reports that connect research benches with those street trenches. Here we share the complexity of mind science because, as you know, details really do matter. One of the most pervasive, misunderstood challenges is how commonplace medications, like those written for ADHD, are used so regularly without clear guidelines. If you think you'd like more specifics, take a minute to download my 2-page PDF packed with video links and references on the absolute essentials of how to start ADHD medications. They're easily available at corebrainjournal.com/start. Thanks for listening. Do connect and stay tuned. Together we can make a difference.